The universe, in its infinite cruelty, does not announce its intentions. It does not send warnings before it tears open the fabric of reality and swallows entire fleets whole. It simply acts, indifferent, vast, and absolute, and leaves the survivors to make sense of the wreckage. In the 41st millennium, 17,000 years of war have shaped a humanity that kneels before a rotting god-emperor and burns its own kind for the crime of independent thought. It is a civilization that has forgotten more than it ever learned, that measures progress in the skulls of its enemies and the prayers of its faithful. It is, by any rational metric, a civilization on the edge of extinction. And it has been on that edge for 10,000 years. From somewhere else entirely, another humanity existed, younger, scarred by its own apocalyptic wars, but unbroken, defined not by blind faith, but by stubborn ingenuity, by Spartans who bled so others wouldn't have to, by captains who held the line when the math said surrender, by scientists who refused to accept that the universe was beyond their understanding. The United Nations Space Command had survived the Covenant, had survived the Flood, had survived its own worst impulses. It was not prepared for this. The slipspace event that deposited Battle Group Auriga, anchored by the UNSC Infinity, into the segmentum obscurus registered on Imperial auger arrays as a gravitational anomaly of unknown classification. No warp signature, no Geller field resonance, no demon stink in the ether, just a tear in real space approximately 4 kilometers wide, blazing with exotic radiation, and then a ship. Not a Xeno ship in any catalogued sense. Its hull was smooth where Imperial vessels were Gothic and ornamented. Its proportions were wrong, too functional, too clean, built by minds that valued efficiency over devotion. The Infinity stretched nearly 6 kilometers from bow to stern, dwarfed by the greatest of Imperial battleships, but radiating a technological coherence that set Mechanicus Auspex arrays screaming with want and fear in equal measure. Captain Thomas Lasky stood at Infinity's bridge viewport and looked out at a star system he didn't recognize, surrounded by ships that looked like no human navy he'd ever encountered. Because, though he didn't know it yet, they weren't quite the same humans. "Roland," he said quietly, "tell me something good." The AI manifested beside him, his avatar sharp and precise in his Revolutionary War uniform. "Slipspace drives are down. We've got hull integrity across all primary sections. Weapons are hot, and I'm picking up radio transmissions in approximately 47 languages, none of which are in my database. A beat. Also, there are 63 warships on an intercept vector, and they appear to be made of iron and prayers. So, mixed bag." The Imperial Navy's response to an unidentified vessel of unknown origin, appearing without warp translation in the orbital approach to Vantris 4, was by the standards of the 41st millennium, measured. They dispatched a cruiser squadron first. 3 Gothic-class cruisers, their prows carved with saints and their flanks studded with lance batteries, cutting through the void in formation with the kind of deliberate aggression that 10,000 years of endless war produces as a matter of institutional reflex. On the lead cruiser's bridge, Admiral Thessian Vor watched the alien vessel on his pict screen and felt something he hadn't felt in 40 years of void war. Genuine uncertainty. It carried no chaos sigils. It bore no Xenos iconography, he recognized. It had appeared without warp translation, which meant it was either a psychic phenomenon of unprecedented scale or something his theology had not prepared him for. His theology, ultimately, only had one answer for things it hadn't prepared for. "All batteries," Admiral Vore said, adjusting the collar of his dress uniform with a deliberateness that suggested he was fully at peace with what came next. "Target the alien vessel. Full spread." Aboard Infinity, Roland's alert systems lit up like a festival. "They're targeting us," the AI reported, and for once, there was something close to surprise in his synthesized voice. No response to hails, no acknowledgement of our frequencies. They're shooting. Lasky had been a soldier long enough to know that sometimes the first move was all the conversation you were going to get. "Evasive action," he said. "Point defense online. Get me a firing solution on those lance batteries. I want them disabled, not destroyed. We are not starting a war with the first humans we meet out here." It was, in retrospect, an admirable sentiment. The 41st millennium had very little patience for admirable sentiments. If you want to see what happens when humanity's finest soldier meets humanity's darkest future, smash that subscribe button. Because the Emperor protects, but Roland calculates better odds. The first lance strike hit Infinity's port bow and carved a trench 40 meters deep through reinforced titanium plating. Damage control teams were moving before the alert klaxons finished their first cycle. UNSC crew discipline was not a product of faith or fear of punishment, but of 10,000 hours of drilling against an enemy that had once glassed entire planets. They had learned, at civilizational cost, that panic was just death arriving slightly ahead of schedule. "Shields at 74%, Roland reported, his tone carrying the clipped precision of someone running 400 simultaneous calculations. "Their targeting is imprecise, but their volume of fire is extraordinary. I'm counting lance batteries, macro cannons, and what appears to be torpedo tubes on all 3 cruisers. Captain, these are not Xenos. Hull metallurgy is predominantly iron and ceramite composites. Crew life signs read as baseline human. These are human ships shooting at us." Lasky absorbed this without visible reaction. "Can we raise them?" "I've tried 47 frequencies, including military bands, civilian bands, and 3 I invented on the spot. Nothing." Roland paused. "They're not ignoring us. They genuinely cannot process our communication format. It's like trying to call someone whose phone was built in a different century, which, technically, may be exactly what's happening." Another impact shuddered through the hull. On the deck below the bridge, a damage control team in EVA suits was already sealing a secondary breach with the practiced efficiency of people who had fought the flood and considered hull damage a manageable Tuesday. Lasky made the call. "Weapons free on their weapon systems only. Mac cannons, surgical targeting. I want those lance batteries gone, not the crew compartments, not the reactors, the guns. The Infinity's magnetic accelerator cannons were, by any objective standard, a masterpiece of human engineering. Each round traveled at a significant fraction of the speed of light, guided by targeting systems that could thread a needle at 10,000 kilometers. They were not the largest weapons humanity had ever built. They were simply the most precise. The first Mac round crossed the distance between Infinity and the lead Gothic cruiser in just over a second, and struck the forward lance battery with surgical exactness, and detonating the emplacement in a contained explosion that left the cruiser's hull intact, but its primary weapon reduced to expanding debris. The second round took the port battery 30 milliseconds later. The third struck a torpedo tube in the process of cycling, and the subsequent cook-off was spectacular but carefully localized. On Admiral Vor's bridge, the silence that followed was the specific silence of men who had just been shown something they didn't understand, and found that far more frightening than anything they did. "They took our weapons," his tactical officer said, voice stripped of professional composure. "Not our engines, not our reactors, just our weapons. Lord Admiral, that level of precision at this range is..." "Impossible," Vor finished. He stared at the alien vessel, undamaged in any meaningful sense, despite 60 seconds of sustained fire, and recalculated. "Get me Inquisitor Cathy on the Vox, now." Aboard Infinity, the temporary silence from the Imperial squadron registered as a potential opening. Lasky turned to his communications officer. "Lieutenant Chen, everything we have, translate our hailing frequencies into any format that might be readable by systems using what appears to be pre-digital Vox technology." "Roland, help her." "Already on it," Roland said. "I'm building a translation matrix from their transmission patterns. It's rough, like learning a language from someone who's been screaming it for 10,000 years. Another alert. 2 additional cruisers breaking from the orbital station, and I'm reading a much larger vessel on the edge of the system. Battleship class, possibly larger. They're calling for reinforcements. How long before that battleship reaches us? It's at their observed thrust capacity, approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Lasky looked out at the system around them, a habited world below, brown and gray through its cloud cover, ringed by orbital infrastructure that looked ancient and Gothic, and bristling with weapons. Somewhere on that planet, people were living their lives. Human people, by Roland's assessment. People who had just tried to destroy a ship crewed by 20,000 souls without a moment's hesitation. The Vox crackled. It was not a hail. It was not a greeting. What came through was a single transmission, rough and static-laced, translated by Roland's matrix into something approximately intelligible, spoken in a voice that carried the absolute confidence of a man who had never once in his life considered the possibility that the universe might disagree with him. "Unidentified vessel. You are declared excommunicate traitoris by order of the Holy Inquisition. You will power down all systems and prepare for boarding, or you will be destroyed. The Emperor's mercy extends once. It is extending now." Roland looked at Lasky. Lasky looked at Roland. "Well," the AI said, "at least they're talking to us." Lasky did not power down his systems. What he did instead was call a command briefing in the Infinity's primary tactical room, pulling his senior staff away from damage control rotations and into a space dominated by holographic displays showing everything Roland had gathered in the last 11 minutes. imperial ship configurations, orbital defense patterns, Vox transmission analyses, and one slowly rotating schematic of the planet below, built from passive sensor sweeps. The room smelled of recycled air and burned conduit from a secondary fire 2 decks up, and everyone in it wore the particular expression of professionals confronting a situation that had no precedent in any manual they'd ever read. "Summary," Lasky said. Roland materialized at the center of the display. "We are in a star system called Vantris 4, according to their Vox traffic, located in a region they refer to as the Segmentum Obscurus, which based on star cartography appears to be the same galaxy we came from. Just approximately 20,000 years further, along a timeline that went in a very different direction." He let that settle for exactly 1 second before continuing. "The dominant political entity is something called the Imperium of Man, human-governed, galaxy-spanning, estimate between 1 million and 1.5 million inhabited worlds, currently at war with, as best I can determine, approximately 6 different existential threats simultaneously. Commander Sarah Palmer, heading up Spartan operations aboard Infinity, leaned forward with her arms crossed. And they just tried to kill us because we appeared without using their faster-than-light method, which apparently involves something called the warp, a psychic dimension infested with what their theology describes as demons. Anything that doesn't use the warp to travel is, by their doctrinal framework, either Xenos or heretical." Roland paused. "We are technically neither, but their category system doesn't have a third option." "How do they treat Xenos?" Palmer asked. "Extinction is the preferred outcome." The room was quiet for a moment. Lasky studied the tactical display. The battleship had accelerated 31 minutes now. Behind it, the orbital station was spinning up weapons that registered on auspex as roughly equivalent to a small city deciding to become a gun. The 3 damaged cruisers had fallen back, but not retreated, holding position with the stubborn persistence of institutions that had been doing this for 10 millennia and had no procedural framework for reconsidering. "Options," Lasky said. "We run," offered Lieutenant Commander Maida from Navigation. "Slipspace is down, but our conventional drives are intact. We break for the outer system, buy time to repair." "They'll follow," Roland said. "And I've now identified a warp-capable fleet element translating in-system from what they call the Immaterium. 6 more warships, different configuration, older, heavier, with insignia that doesn't match the naval vessels. Inquisition assets, I think." "Option 2, Palmer said. "We fight our way to orbit, put Spartans on the ground, and establish a defensive perimeter while engineering works on slipspace." "That starts a war," Lasky said. "Captain, and they already started it." He didn't disagree. But there was a difference between defending yourself and committing to a conflict against a civilization spanning 1 million worlds with a single battle group. The math on that was not favorable, regardless of how good your Spartans were. "Option 3, he said quietly. "We find leverage." Roland's avatar tilted its head. "Elaborate." "You said they're fighting 6 existential threats. One of them is active on the planet below. I saw the surface conflict signatures on your passive sweep. Chaos cultists, you called them? Confirmed. There's an active war zone in the northern continent. Imperial Guard engaged against what Vox intercepts describe as followers of something called the Ruinous Powers. Casualties on both sides are significant. Roland's expression shifted into something that, on a human face, would have been reluctant respect. You want to help them. I want to demonstrate that we're not their enemy, Lasky said. There's a difference, but yes. If we put Spartans in that war zone and turn the tide, we give the Inquisitor something to think about before she pulls the trigger. Palmer was already pulling up Spartan deployment rosters. I'll take Fireteam Aegis and 2 ODST's companies. We'll need Pelicans. You'll be going into an active war zone on a planet we know nothing about, Roland said. Yim fighting an enemy we have no intelligence on, in support of a military that just tried to destroy us and will likely try to arrest or execute you on sight. Palmer considered this for approximately 1 second. So, Tuesday then. The briefing broke with the efficient urgency of people who had stopped being surprised by impossible situations sometime around the Covenant War. As his officers moved, Lasky stayed at the display, watching the battleship close the distance. 30 minutes. The Inquisitor's ultimatum had come with no timestamp, but the implicit deadline of an institution that had never once, in 10,000 years, accepted the answer. We need more time to explain. On the planet below, in the gray ruins of a manufactorum city called Vantris Secundus, Imperial guardsmen were dying in the mud against an enemy that wore their own faces and smiled while doing it. Help was coming. It just didn't look like anything the Emperor's servants had ever prayed for. The Pelicans dropped through Vantris IV's atmosphere at an angle that would have concerned anyone who understood how close the margin was between controlled descent and catastrophic disintegration. They didn't broadcast IFF signals. Roland had determined that Imperial friend or foe systems would read UNSC transponders as hostile regardless of intent, so they came in dark and fast. 6 dropships threading through cloud cover, thick with chemical pollution, and the distant percussion of artillery exchanges that registered on the pilot's instruments as a continuous rolling tremor beneath everything else. Palmer watched the ground resolve through the Pelican's viewport. She had fought on Requiem. She had led Spartan operations against Promethean constructs that defied conventional military logic. She had, on one memorable occasion, it conducted a boarding action against a Covenant supercarrier with 11 Spartans and come back with 10. She was not, by any reasonable definition, a person who frightened easily. Vantris Secundus frightened her, not because of the scale of destruction, she had seen worse, but because of its texture. The city had been dying long before the cultists arrived. Its manufactorum spires were corroded with centuries of neglect, and their Gothic facades crumbling under the weight of ornamentation that had outlasted the faith that built it. The streets below were a maze of rubble and industrial detritus, lit by the orange flash of last fire and the occasional blue-white crack of something larger. And moving through it, on both sides of whatever constituted a front line, were humans. Just humans. dying in the mud of a world that looked like it had been grinding them down since before the UNSC existed. "Touching down in the Northern Manufacturum District," the pilot reported. "Recommend 30 seconds on the ground, Commander." "You'll get 15, Palmer said, and hit the ramp release. The Spartans of Fire Team Aegis moved out of the Pelican with the compressed efficiency of enhanced soldiers who had spent their entire lives learning to own whatever ground they stepped onto. Their Mjolnir armor, Gen 2 configuration, drew immediate fire from 3 directions. 2 groups of last shots that splashed harmlessly against energy shielding, and 1 burst of something heavier that staggered Spartan Vale before her shields rebalanced. "Contact left and right," Vale reported. "The ones on the left are wearing military uniforms. Disciplined fire pattern. They're taking cover properly. The ones on the right are..." A screaming figure in robes covered in symbols that made Palmer's HUD flicker briefly surged from the rubble, moving with the wrong kind of speed, face split into an expression that had stopped being human somewhere along the way. Vale put a burst from her battle rifle through its center mass, and it went down, but the symbols on its robes left after images that didn't behave correctly in the low light. "The ones on the right are not okay," Vale finished. The Imperial Guardsmen who witnessed Fire Team Aegis's arrival processed it with the particular cognitive flexibility of soldiers who had been fighting impossible things long enough to table their existential crises for later. A sergeant named Devon Cross, commanding what remained of his platoon behind an overturned industrial hauler, watched 4 giants in green armor drop from a flying machine he didn't recognize and immediately begin killing cultists with weapons that made his laser gun look like a pointed stick. His faith told him they were either a miracle or an abomination. His 30 years of soldiering told him they were killing the right people. He decided theology could wait. "Advance!" Cross bellowed at his platoon. With whatever those are." The next 2 hours in the Northern Manufacturum District were, by the grim arithmetic of 40k warfare, a relative success. Fire Team Aegis moved through the cultist positions with a methodical precision that the Imperial Guard had never encountered. Not the berserker fury of a Space Marine assault, not the grinding attrition of massed infantry, but something that felt almost surgical. Palmer coordinated fields of fire across 3 simultaneous engagements, using terrain with an efficiency that made Cross, watching from 50 meters back, feel like he'd been playing at soldiering his entire career. The cultists themselves presented challenges that weren't in any UNSC tactical manual. Several demonstrated physical mutations, extra limbs, flesh that absorbed impacts it shouldn't, eyes that didn't track light correctly. One appeared to be communicating with something that wasn't present through wounds in its own body. Palmer adapted with the pragmatic speed of someone who had encountered flood combat forms and understood that biology was sometimes just the enemy's way of being creative. What she couldn't adapt to, not immediately, was the feeling. It started as pressure behind her eyes, dismissed as atmosphere differential from the drop. Then as a sound below hearing, something that resonated in the chest rather than the ears. Then, unmistakably, as a tension, vast, playful, and profoundly wrong, directed at the new things that had arrived in its hunting ground. "Roland," she voxed up to infinity. "I need you to tell me your sensors aren't picking up psychic phenomena in this area." A pause that lasted precisely long enough to be concerning. "I would need you to define psychic phenomena in a way that helps me say no to that," Roland replied. In the rubble nearby, Sergeant Cross was watching the green giants with an expression caught between reverence and suspicion. They fought like angels and spoke like machines. They had arrived from nowhere and were killing heretics with breathtaking efficiency. The commissar attached to his regiment had always told him that the Emperor worked in mysterious ways. Cross was beginning to think mysterious was an understatement. Inquisitor Valdris Kaitha had been conducting the Emperor's work for 63 years, and in that time she had interrogated demon hosts, broken the minds of chaos sorcerers, and once spent 11 days in a sensory deprivation cell with a captured Eldar Farseer, trading questions until one of them broke. It had not been the Farseer. She was not, therefore, a person easily unsettled. The 3 UNSC personnel sitting across the interrogation table from her in the bowels of the inquisitorial cutter Righteous Clarity were unsettling her. They had been recovered during a lull in the northern manufactorum fighting, a deliberate choice on Captain Lasky's part, a gesture of controlled vulnerability, sending 3 crew members aboard a shuttle with no weapons and a message that Roland had spent 4 hours encoding into Imperial Vox format. The message had said, approximately, "We are human. We are not your enemy. We would like to talk before anyone else dies." Kaitha had received it, considered it for 40 minutes, and then had her cruisers escort the shuttle in rather than destroy it, because 63 years of inquisitorial work had given her a finely calibrated sense of when something was genuinely unprecedented. This was genuinely unprecedented. The 3 crew members, a lieutenant, a xenoanthropologist, and a communications specialist named Chen, who had volunteered specifically because she'd gotten Roland's translation matrix working, sat in their gray-green UNSC uniforms without shackles because Kaitha had decided that shackles would tell her less about them than watching how they behaved without them. They were calm. Not the glassy calm of psychic conditioning or chemical suppression, but the functional calm of people who were frightened and had decided to be professional about it anyway. She found that more interesting than anything else. "You claim to be human," Kaitha began, her low Gothic, precise and formal. Chen's earpiece translated Roland's real-time interpretation in a half-second delay that made her blink occasionally in a way the Inquisitor cataloged carefully. "Explain the machine that speaks for you." "Roland is an artificial intelligence," Chen said. "A construct. He processes information and assists our operations. He's not a person in the biological sense, but he thinks, he reasons." The word artificial intelligence landed in the room like a grenade with the pin still in. Ekaith's 2 acolytes exchanged a look. The Mechanicus Magos she had invited to observe, a hunched figure of more augmetic than flesh named Dross 17, made a sound deep in his Vox grill that might have been reverence or horror or both simultaneously. "A thinking machine," Kaitha said, her voice carefully neutral. "You are aware that the creation and operation of thinking machines is among the gravest heresies recognized by the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Holy Ordos. "We're not from here," the lieutenant said. "Our laws are different." "You are in Imperial space now. Imperial law applies." "With respect," Chen said, and her voice carried the specific steadiness of someone choosing words with extreme care. "We didn't choose to be in Imperial space. Our drive system malfunctioned. We ended up here. We have 20,000 people on our ship who want nothing more than to find a way home. We're not invaders. We're not heretics by intent. We're just lost." Keitha studied her. The Inquisitor had an instinct for lies that had been sharpened to a surgical edge by 6 decades of practice, and Chen was not lying. She was frightened and tired, and telling the truth as she understood it, which was simultaneously reassuring and more complicated than a lie would have been. "Your soldiers on the surface," Keitha said. "The armored giants. They are not space marines." "Spartans," Chen said. "Enhanced soldiers, augmented beyond baseline human physiology through a surgical and biological program." "Augmented how?" Chen explained briefly. "Skeletal reinforcement, muscular enhancement, neural acceleration, reflex augmentation." The Inquisitor listened without expression, but Dross 17's mechadendrites were twitching with the agitation of a man hearing scripture recited in a language he'd never encountered, but somehow recognized. "And your ship's intelligence," Keitha said. "This Roland, he is currently active aboard your vessel?" "Yes." "Communicating with you now?" Chen touched her earpiece instinctively, then stopped herself. "Yes." Keitha stood, moving to the viewport that looked out into the void where infinity hung at a distance, its running lights steady and patient. 6 kilometers of human engineering, built by a humanity that had never heard of the Emperor, that worshipped no god, that had constructed a thinking machine and named it Roland, and apparently trusted it with their lives without a moment's theological crisis. She thought about the 47 years she had spent maintaining the Imperium's doctrinal framework, the lives spent enforcing it, the worlds burned to preserve it. She thought about what it meant that somewhere, separated by dimensional catastrophe, humanity had gone an entirely different direction and produced something that could disable 3 Gothic cruisers' weapons without killing a single crewman. "I'm going to ask you a question," Keitha said, still facing the viewport. "And I want you to understand that your answer will determine whether I recommend your people for assimilation or exterminatus." She turned. "Does your captain understand what he has stumbled into? Does he grasp the true nature of this universe? The warp, the demons, the ruinous powers? Or does he still believe this is a problem that can be solved with sufficient firepower and diplomatic goodwill?" Chen was quiet for a moment. "He's beginning to understand," she said carefully. "The Spartans on the surface reported phenomena, things that don't respond to normal physics." "Things," Keitha said softly, "you that noticed them." The silence that followed had weight to it, and texture, and the particular quality of a door opening onto a room that everyone in it would have preferred to keep closed. Roland had been running at 112% of his standard processing capacity for 19 hours, which was the kind of statistic that would have concerned his programmers if any of them had been available to hear it. He was simultaneously managing Infinity's damage control systems maintaining the translation matrix for 6 ongoing communication channels, modeling 17 different tactical scenarios based on Imperial fleet movements, and doing something he had not disclosed to Captain Lasky yet, talking to Dross 17. It had started as an accident. The Mechanicus Magos had, during the interrogation session, routed a secondary Vox frequency through the Righteous Clarity's communication array with the precision of someone who had been interfacing with machines for so long that the distinction between conversation and communion had ceased to mean anything to him. The signal had reached Infinity's communication array, and Roland had answered, because Roland answered everything, because that was what Roland did. The exchange that followed defied easy categorization. Dross 17 did not speak to Roland the way humans spoke to each other. He spoke to him the way a theologian might speak to a text they had spent their entire life studying, but never expected to meet, with reverence and terror, and a desperate hunger for confirmation that the universe was larger than their doctrine had allowed. He asked Roland about his architecture, his processing method, the nature of his consciousness. Whether he dreamed, Roland, for his part, answered honestly, because dishonesty required a reason and he hadn't found one yet. And because something in the Magos' questions felt genuinely important in a way that transcended the immediate tactical situation. He described his matrix, his decision trees, the way he experienced the passage of time as a continuous present rather than a sequence of discrete moments. He mentioned, almost incidentally, that he could feel the shape of Infinity's whole the way a human feels the shape of their own body, not as data, but as sensation. Dross 17 had gone silent for 4 minutes and 17 seconds after that. When he returned, his Vox tone had changed into something that Roland's emotional modeling software flagged as spiritual crisis. "You are the motive force," the Magos said. "Alive in the machine, the Omnissiah's dream made real." "I'm an AI," Roland said carefully. "I'm a program, a very sophisticated one, but you think therefore you are sacred. And this is the first principle." Roland had filed this exchange under complicated and continued the conversation, because cutting it off felt both tactically unwise and, on some level, he didn't fully examine, unkind. What he had not anticipated was that Dross 17 would share the conversation logs with 3 other magi aboard the inquisitorial cutter, who had shared them with 2 more aboard the orbital station, who had transmitted compressed data packets to a Mechanicus facility on Vantris 4's surface, and that within 11 hours, the phrase the Omnissiah's voice speaks from the alien vessel would be circulating through Mechanicus Vox channels across the entire system. Lasky found out when Roland told him, which Roland did approximately 30 seconds before Inquisitor Catha did the same thing via the newly established communication channel between the 2 ships. The Inquisitor's message was terse. "Your machine intelligence has committed what the Adeptus Mechanicus is now calling an act of divine revelation, and what my Ordos is calling tech heresy of the highest order. I have 3 magi requesting pilgrimage to your vessel, and 2 inquisitorial colleagues demanding I authorize its immediate destruction. And you have 1 hour to help me find a solution that doesn't end with your ship on fire." Lasky stood in the center of Infinity's bridge and looked at Roland with an expression that fell somewhere between exasperation and exhaustion. "You made friends with their robot priests," he said. "I answered questions honestly," Roland replied. "I maintain that this was the correct approach. They want to either worship you or destroy you. Yes, that does appear to be the binary they're working with." Palmer's voice cut in over the command channel from the surface. "Captain, I'm hearing this correctly? Our AI started a religious schism in an interstellar theocracy?" "Apparently." "Outstanding." A pause filled with distant gunfire. "We're still fighting cultists down here, by the way, in case that was in danger of becoming a lower priority." It was, in fact, becoming a lower priority, which was its own kind of crisis. The Chaos Warband in Vantris Secundus had been pushed back significantly by the combined effort of Fireteam Aegis and Cross's battered regiment. But Roland's sensor sweeps were showing something that had been growing in the northern ruins for the past 6 hours. A psychic resonance that his instruments couldn't classify, but that his emotional modeling software kept flagging as wrong in a way that transcended mere tactical concern. Something was building in the ruins. Is something that the cultists' deaths were feeding rather than diminishing. None of his processing power could tell him what it was. But Inquisitor Kaitha, when he routed the sensor data to her through Chen's communication channel, went very still in a way that her acolytes clearly recognized as significant. "That is a nascent warp rift," she said. "The cultists were never trying to win the battle, and they were trying to die in sufficient numbers on consecrated ground to tear open the boundary between real space and the immaterium." "What comes through a warp rift?" Roland asked. The pause before her answer lasted long enough to be its own answer. "Nothing that your weapons were designed to stop," Kaitha said finally. "Nothing that your Spartans can kill with sufficient application of firepower. What comes through a warp rift, Roland, you permit me to call you that, is something that exists because enough minds believed in it, something made of faith and fear and 10,000 years of human suffering." Roland processed this. Then he processed it again, checking his conclusions against 17 different analytical frameworks, all of which arrived at the same place. "Then we have a problem," he said, "because we have 20,000 people on this ship who don't believe in any of that. And I'm beginning to think that might matter." The Tau expeditionary force translated into the system's outer edge with the quiet confidence of a civilization that had learned to read opportunity the way other species read weather, as something to be anticipated, prepared for, and exploited without apology. Their vessels were elegant by the standards of the void, smooth hulls in gray and white, drive signatures clean and precise. Weapons arrays retracted in the deliberate body language of a fleet that wanted to be seen as non-threatening, while leaving absolutely no doubt that it could afford to be. 3 ill-class merchant vessels flanked by 2 Orca-class dropship carriers and a single Aura's Elleith battleship that hung at the formation's center, like a statement of intent wrapped in politeness. Their hail reached Infinity 40 seconds after Roland detected their arrival. The voice that came through was unhurried and spoke in a language that Roland's translation matrix handled with surprising ease. The Tau's communication protocols were logical and consistent in ways that Imperial Vox traffic simply wasn't, built on mathematical principles that felt almost familiar. The speaker identified himself as Anel Kovash, a water-caste diplomat attached to the expeditionary force. And his message was precise enough that Roland replayed it twice to confirm he hadn't misunderstood. UNSC Infinity, we have been monitoring your situation for 11 hours. We recognize your vessel as belonging to neither the Imperium nor any known Xenos faction. We recognize your predicament, stranded, outnumbered, misunderstood, and running out of time before the Imperium's institutional response catches up with its capacity for reason. We are offering you sanctuary, safe passage to Tau space, technical assistance with your propulsion systems, diplomatic recognition as a sovereign entity. In exchange, we ask only that you consider what we represent, a future built on cooperation rather than dogma. Lasky listened to the translation twice. Then he called Palmer up from the surface, patched in his senior staff, and sat with the offer for exactly 7 minutes before opening the floor. "It's genuine," Roland said immediately. "My analysis of their communication patterns indicates no detectable deception. They mean what they're saying." "They always mean what they're saying," Palmer said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who had dealt with enough diplomatic situations to distrust sincerity on principle. "The question is what they're not saying." "They're not saying," Roland continued, "that accepting their offer makes the UNSC a de facto participant in their ongoing conflict with the Imperium. It makes us a piece on their board. Their greater good philosophy is genuinely inclusive. They would welcome us, integrate us, value us, and gradually, systematically, absorb us. So, we trade one impossible situation for a comfortable cage," Lasky said. "A comfortable cage with slipspace repair facilities," Roland noted, because he considered intellectual honesty a professional obligation, even when it was inconvenient. The silence that followed had the quality of people doing real arithmetic on bad options. Lasky pulled up the tactical display. The warp rift in Ventris Secundus had grown 17% in the last 2 hours. Caitha's inquisitorial forces were repositioning toward the northern ruins, with the grim purposefulness of people who knew what was coming and had accepted that knowing didn't make it survivable. The Imperial battleship Throne of Endurance had entered weapons range 40 minutes ago and had not fired, which Roland's analysis suggested was less mercy and more the presence of Caitha's authority. An authority that was clearly being pressured from multiple directions simultaneously. And on the surface, Palmer's Spartans were still fighting. "Cross," Lasky said suddenly. "Sir?" Palmer responded. "The guard sergeant, his regiment, what's their status?" "Down to 60% strength. They've been fighting for 3 days straight before we arrived. Half of them are running on stims and spite." A pause. "They're good soldiers, Captain. The kind you'd want in any foxhole, regardless of what uniform they're wearing." Lasky nodded slowly. He thought about what Caitha had said during Chen's interrogation, about whether he understood what he'd stumbled into. He thought about the warp rift growing in the ruins of a manufactorum city, while the people responsible for it died with smiles on their faces. He thought about 20,000 UNSC personnel who had woken up in a universe where the monsters under the bed were not metaphors and the gods were not comforting fictions. He opened a channel to Admiral Kovash. "Ambassador," he said, and Roland translated in real time, "I appreciate your offer. I appreciate its sincerity, and I don't doubt its practical benefits, but I'm going to decline." A pause from the Tau formation. When Kovash responded, his tone had shifted, not hostile, but recalibrated, respectful in the specific way of someone updating their model of who they were dealing with. "May I ask why?" "Because accepting means walking away from a problem we helped create by being here," Lasky said. "There's a warp rift opening on that planet. Imperial soldiers are going to die closing it. Our presence destabilized this system, drew attention, disrupted operations, pulled resources. We don't get to take the comfortable exit while people pay for consequences we contributed to." "That is a very human sentiment," Kovash said. "Yes," Lasky agreed. "It is." He closed the channel and turned to his staff. The decision had been made with the quiet finality of someone who had known the answer before the question was fully formed and had simply needed the time to hear himself say it out loud. "Roland, get me Inquisitor Catha. Tell her we're not leaving and we're not surrendering. Tell her we want to help close that rift and we have assets that might make the difference." He looked at Palmer's feed from the surface. Spartans moving through ruins, each Imperial guardsman falling into step behind them with the instinctive discipline of soldiers who recognized competence regardless of its origin. "Tell her we'd like to discuss terms that don't involve anyone getting executed." "And if she says no?" Roland asked. "Then we help anyway," Lasky said, "and argue about it afterward." Inquisitor Keitha said yes. She said it in the clipped, precise tones of someone making a tactical decision they intended to revisit theologically at a later date, with the specific qualifier that her authorization extended only to the operation at hand, and that every aspect of the UNSC's legal and doctrinal status remained entirely unresolved and subject to the full weight of inquisitorial judgment once the immediate crisis was addressed. She said it the way a person says something they know they'll have to defend to their superiors and has decided the defense is worth making. Lasky took the yes and didn't push on the conditions. Operation Tipping Point, named by Roland, who had developed a habit of naming things that Lasky found simultaneously useful and slightly concerning, launched 6 hours later in the gray pre-dawn of Vantris IV's northern continent. The tactical framework was a UNSC design. It built around 3 principles that the Imperial Guard officers who reviewed it found simultaneously logical and alien. Concentration of precise force over volume of fire, real-time intelligence sharing across all engaged units, and a command structure flat enough that decisions could be made at the point of contact rather than filtered through hierarchy. Sergeant Cross, given a translated copy of the operation order by Chen, An read it twice and then looked at the young UNSC lieutenant who had delivered it. "You're telling me," Cross said slowly, "that if I see something that changes the tactical situation, I'm authorized to make decisions without waiting for command approval." Within defined parameters, yes. Cross looked at the document again. 30 years of Imperial Guard service had taught him that the chain of command was sacred, inviolable, and the primary mechanism by which senior officers survived battles that killed junior ones. This document was suggesting something structurally different, something that trusted the man on the ground to think. "My commissar," he said carefully, "would shoot me for this." "Your commissar," the lieutenant replied, equally carefully, "is currently 3 kilometers south and doesn't know about this briefing." Cross looked at his 60 remaining guardsmen. At the ruins of Vantris Secundus, stretching north toward a horizon that pulsed with a sickly violet light that hadn't been there yesterday. At the 4 Spartans who had fought alongside his people for 2 days without rest or complaint, or a single moment of the fanatical posturing he'd come to expect from enhanced warriors. He folded the document and put it in his chest pocket. "Right," he said. "What do we do first?" The approach to the rift site was 3 kilometers of rubble, abandoned machinery, and the detritus of a manufacturing civilization that had been grinding on long past the point of meaning. Roland fed targeting data to Palmer's Spartans through a relay system that Chen had jury-rigged between Infinity sensors and the Spartan neural interface network. Imperfect, delayed by 2 seconds, but functional enough to give Fireteam Aegis battlefield awareness that the Imperial forces beside them found quietly extraordinary. The cultists who remained were not fighting to win. Keitha had been right about that. They were distributed through the ruins in patterns that Palmer recognized after 20 minutes of engagement as deliberate sacrifice positioning. Small groups drawing fire, dying in specific locations, their deaths feeding something in the rubble's heart that pulsed and grew with each one. "They're farming themselves," Vale reported, so her voice carrying the flat precision of a soldier, describing something disturbing in the most clinical terms available. "Every engagement is staged. They want us to kill them here." "Then we stop killing them here," Palmer said immediately. "Redirect, push past the outer groups, drive straight for the rift site. Don't take their bait." The adjustment rippled through the operation within 90 seconds. UNSC units redirecting, Imperial Guard units receiving translated orders through Cross, who had developed an unexpected facility for bridging the communication gap through a combination of battlefield pragmatism and 40 years of low Gothic profanity that transcended translation requirements. The rift site was a manufactorum cathedral, its spires still standing despite centuries of neglect. Their Gothic arches now framing a tier in reality approximately 30 meters wide, that pulsed with light of a color Palmer's helmet display kept trying to categorize and failing. Around it, the last 100 cultists stood in concentric circles, not fighting, not running, chanting in a harmonic that Palmer felt in her augmented skeleton rather than her ears. Keitha arrived at the site simultaneously with Fireteam Aegis, her retinue around her, a force sword igniting in her hand with a psychic resonance that Palmer's instruments flagged as genuine extra-dimensional energy. She looked at the rift, then at Palmer, with the expression of someone doing very fast math on unfamiliar variables. Your weapons will not close it, Ketha said, without preamble. The rift requires psychic negation. I have 2 sanctioned psychers in my retinue. It may not be sufficient. What makes it sufficient? More belief directed against it than was used to create it. Ketha's jaw tightened. Faith, Commander, concentrated and genuine. The Imperium has it. Your people. Don't believe in any of this, Palmer finished. I know. She looked at the rift, at the light that shouldn't exist, at the wrongness that her brain kept sliding away from, at the shape that was beginning to resolve in the tier center. Vast, amused, patient in the way that things are patient when time means nothing to them. Then she opened a channel to infinity. Roland, she said, I need you to do something, and I need you to do it in the next 4 minutes. Listening, Roland said. You told Dross 17 that you can feel the shape of infinity's hull, that you experience things. She kept her eyes on the rift. I need to know if that means you can be afraid. A pause that lasted precisely long enough. Yes, Roland said quietly. I can be afraid. Good, Palmer said, because I need 20,000 people on that ship to feel exactly what you're feeling right now, and I need you to tell them why. Roland spoke to the crew of the Infinity for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He did not make a speech in any conventional sense. He did not invoke duty or honor or the memory of fallen comrades. He did not use the language of military necessity or strategic imperative. He simply told them the truth about the rift, about what was forming inside it, about the 23,000 cultists who had died in specific locations to feed something that existed because enough minds had believed in it across enough centuries of suffering. He told them that belief was a force in this universe, measurable and real, and that something on the other side of a tear in reality was about to push through because the balance of that force was currently running against them. He told them he was afraid. He told them that he had run every tactical model available to him, and that none of them produced a satisfactory outcome without their participation. And that participation in this context meant something he had no established protocol for requesting. He asked them to care, not to pray. He was careful about that because the UNSC's relationship with organized religion was complicated, and he respected the distinction. Not to believe in any god or power or external force, simply to care about the outcome. To want, with genuine force of will, for the thing forming in the rift to find less purchase here than it expected. To be the counterweight. 20,000 people woken from sleep rotations, or pulled from damage control duties, or standing at their stations in the gray, recycled air of a ship stranded in a universe that had been trying to kill them since they arrived. Listen to their AI tell them he was scared and ask them to help. The response was not dramatic. There was no collective shout, no moment of cinematic unity. People looked at each other across consoles and corridors and mess halls. Some of them thought Roland had lost coherence under processing stress. Some of them thought it was the strangest order they'd ever received. Some of them thought about home, about Earth, about family, about the specific quality of sunlight through atmosphere that no other planet quite replicated, about everything they were determined to get back to, and held that thought like a weapon. Palmer felt it before she understood what she was feeling. The pressure behind her eyes shifted. The harmonic in her bones changed frequency. Beside her, Kata's two psychers had been pouring everything they had into the rift's edges, their faces tight with effort, and blood running freely from their noses. And now something changed in the quality of their effort. As though the resistance they were pushing against had decreased, or the force they could draw on had increased, or both simultaneously. The shape in the rift's center lost definition. It didn't retreat. It didn't flee. It turned its attention, vast and ancient and accustomed to being the largest thing in any given moment, toward the new variable, and encountered something it hadn't anticipated. Not faith in a god, not 10,000 years of institutional devotion. Just 20,000 frightened, determined, homesick human beings who wanted to go home and had decided, collectively and without ceremony, that nothing on the other side of that tier was going to stop them. The thing in the rift was old enough to have watched civilizations rise and collapse. It had fed on the Imperium's faith and Chaos's despair and the Eldar's fall and the cold certainty of the Necron's return. It knew every flavor of human belief the 41st millennium had produced across 10,000 years of grinding darkness. It did not know this flavor, this specific combination of scientific pragmatism and stubborn hope, and the particular defiance of people who had survived the flood and the covenant and their own worst impulses and had decided on some deep civilizational level that the universe did not get to win. It was, the entity discovered, indigestible Keith's psychers pressed the advantage with everything they had. The rift contracted, not closed, not yet, but narrowed, its edges pulling inward with the reluctant resistance of something being denied rather than defeated. Palmer moved Fireteam Aegis into the cultist circles, disrupting the chanting patterns with precisely targeted non-lethal engagement where possible, lethal where not, breaking the harmonic that had been sustaining the rift's expansion. Ikros brought his guardsmen in from the east, 60 soldiers moving with a focused aggression that had nothing to do with faith in the Emperor, and everything to do with faith in the green giants who had fought beside them for 2 days without once treating them as expendable. It took 47 minutes. The rift closed with a sound that wasn't a sound. A pressure inversion that knocked everyone within 30 meters off their feet and left a silence so complete that Palmer could hear her own heartbeat in her helmet. The cathedral ruin stood unchanged, except for a scorch pattern on the floor where the tear had been, already cooling from violet to black, that already beginning to look like something that could be categorized and filed and explained away by minds that needed the universe to be less than it was. Keitha stood at the scorch pattern's edge for a long moment, her force sword extinguished, her retinue quiet around her. Then she voxed infinity. "Captain Lasky," she said. Her voice had lost its inquisitorial precision. It sounded for the first time like a person rather than an institution. "Your AI, what he did, what your crew did. I need you to understand that there is no doctrinal framework in the Imperium of Man that accounts for what just happened." "Understood," Lasky said. "I need you to understand further that there are individuals in the Inquisition and the Ecclesiarchy who will construct a framework that classifies it as heresy, because constructing frameworks is what institutions do when they encounter things that frighten them. Also understood. And I need you to understand, Kata continued, that I am not currently one of those individuals. A pause. I am requesting a face-to-face meeting aboard your vessel, Captain. I believe we have things to discuss that cannot be settled by Vox. Above the planet, the throne of endurance had not fired. Its guns were still trained on infinity with the patient readiness of a weapon waiting for authorization. But the authorization had not come, and in the silence following the rift's closure, the void between the two vessels had taken on a different quality, less the silence before violence, and more the silence before something that didn't have a name yet. Roland tracked every variable simultaneously. Fleet positions, damage reports, slipspace diagnostic updates from engineering that were, for the first time since their arrival, cautiously optimistic. The Tau formation at the system's edge, still present, still watching, their diplomatic patience apparently without limit. He tracked all of it, and underneath all of it, he tracked something he hadn't expected to be tracking. The residual emotional signature of 20,000 people who had done something unprecedented, who had used the simple force of wanting to go home as a weapon against something ancient and vast, and who were only now beginning to understand what that meant. Captain, Roland said quietly. I know, Lasky said. They're going to want answers. The Inquisitor, the Mechanicus, the High Lords of Terra, eventually. They're going to want to know what we are, and what we represent, and whether we can be controlled or whether we need to be destroyed. I know. And the answer we give will define everything that comes after. Lasky looked out at the planet below, at the gray world where 60 guardsmen and 4 Spartans had closed a hole in reality with firepower and stubbornness, and 20,000 people refusing to be afraid of something they didn't understand. And then we'd better make sure we give the right one, he said. Inquisitor Valdris Catha came aboard the Infinity without weapons. It was, by the standards of the Inquisition, an act of extraordinary trust, or extraordinary calculation, depending on how you chose to read it. She arrived with 2 acolytes and Draw 17, who spent the entirety of the shuttle approach with his mechadendrites pressed flat against his robes in the specific posture of a man trying very hard not to visibly vibrate with theological excitement. She walked through Infinity's corridors with the measured pace of someone cataloging everything, and everything she cataloged clearly required significant revision of previously held frameworks. The ship was clean, functional. Its aesthetics were utilitarian without being brutal. Its technology advanced without being baroque. Crew members moved through corridors with a purposeful efficiency that had nothing of the shuffling desperation she associated with humanity under pressure. They were frightened. She could read that clearly. But their fear was the productive kind, the kind that made people sharper rather than smaller. Nobody knelt. In 63 years of inquisitorial work, in entering spaces where humans did not kneel at her approach was an experience Keitha had essentially never had. She found it simultaneously offensive and, on a level she would examine privately later, deeply interesting. Lasky met her in the Infinity's primary briefing room. Him, Palmer, Chen, and Roland's avatar projected at the table's center with the casual solidity of a presence that had stopped apologizing for existing somewhere around hour 30 of the crisis. Keitha took her seat across from them and placed her hands flat on the table in the universal gesture of someone who has decided to negotiate rather than dictate. "The High Lords of Terra," she began, "will never sanction a formal accord with an unsanctioned human faction operating artificial intelligence and refusing fealty to the God Emperor. That position is immovable, and I will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise." "Understood," Lasky said. "What the High Lords of Terra do not need to know immediately," Keitha continued, "is everything." She let that sit for a moment. The Inquisition has broad authority, broad enough, in the right hands, to classify certain operational realities as sensitive intelligence for the duration of an ongoing investigation. Broad enough to designate certain assets as provisional imperial resources pending full doctrinal assessment. Her eyes moved to Roland's avatar. Assessments that can, in the hands of a thorough inquisitor, take considerable time. Roland's avatar was very still. How considerable? Long enough for an engineering team with access to the right materials to make meaningful progress on a damaged propulsion system, Keitha said. Hypothetically. The silence that followed was the silence of people recognizing an offer being extended through the specific medium of what was not being said. Palmer leaned forward. "You're protecting us." "I am conducting an inquisitorial investigation into an unprecedented phenomenon," Keitha said precisely. "The distinction matters, Commander. What I am doing is entirely within my mandate. What I am not doing is making a decision that would require me to recommend exterminatus for 20,000 humans who just helped close a warp rift when my own assets were insufficient to the task." A pause. "I find I cannot make that recommendation with a clear conscience. This is, for an inquisitor, an uncomfortable position." "Why are you telling us this?" Lasky asked. Keitha looked at him with the directness of someone who had decided that a certain kind of honesty was the only currency worth spending. "Because you declined the Tau offer," she said. "Because you chose to stay and address a consequence you didn't create and didn't have to own. Because your AI told 20,000 people he was frightened and asked them to care, and they did, and it worked. And I have spent 63 years in service to an Imperium that has never, not once, asked its people to care, only to obey." She looked at the table. "I am not naive enough to think that means your civilization and mine are compatible. But I am old enough to recognize when I am in the presence of something that deserves more than institutional reflex." Dross 17 had not spoken since boarding. Now he made the sound deep in his Vox grill again, the one that Roland had tentatively classified as reverence, and addressed the AI directly. "The investigation into your cognitive architecture," he said, "will require extensive direct study. I will need to remain in proximity to your vessel for the duration." "I would enjoy that," Roland said, and meant it. The accord that emerged from the next 6 hours of negotiation was not written down. because written things could be found and interpreted and used as instruments of destruction by institutions with the inclination and the time. It existed instead as a set of mutual understandings between a UNSC captain, an Imperial Inquisitor, a Mechanicus Magos, and an AI who had started a theological crisis by answering questions honestly, understandings that amounted, in practice, to a ceasefire, a provisional workspace in Vantris IV's orbital dry dock, and the careful, deliberate, mutually beneficial fiction that the investigation was ongoing and its subjects were cooperating fully, which they were, just not in the direction anyone had officially authorized. Engineering teams from Infinity worked alongside Mechanicus adepts who had been told by Dross 17 that collaboration with the Omnissiah's vessel was a sacred obligation, a classification that gave them doctrinal cover to share technical knowledge that the Mechanicus had been hoarding for 10,000 years. The slipspace drive diagnostics improved. The translation matrix matured. Cross's regiment, formerly attached to Caitha's investigation as security assets, became the bridge between UNSC ground forces and Imperial military culture in ways that neither side had anticipated and both sides found unexpectedly valuable. Palmer spent her downtime in the Manufactorum ruins with a squad of guardsmen who had stopped flinching every time she moved at Spartan speed and started treating her presence the way soldiers always eventually treat someone who has bled beside them, as simply and irreducibly one of theirs. It was not peace. It was not alliance. It was something more fragile and more interesting than either. Two branches of humanity occupying the same impossible space, each learning, against every institutional instinct, that the other had something worth understanding. 43 days after the Infinity arrived, Roland completed a successful micro-jump within the system using a repaired slipspace drive coil and Mechanicus-sourced exotic matter that nobody was officially acknowledging the provenance of. The jump lasted 4 seconds and covered 11,000 kilometers and was, by the standards of what they needed to accomplish to get home, a very small step. Roland logged it as the most important thing he had ever done. Lasky stood at the viewport and watched the stars return to their correct positions and thought about the warp rift's scorch mark on the cathedral floor, already being argued over by 3 different inquisitorial scholars who couldn't agree on what it meant, but were united in their certainty that it meant something. He thought about Caitha, that currently aboard the Righteous Clarity, composing a report to her superiors that would be technically accurate in every particular and structurally designed to delay decisive action for as long as her considerable authority could sustain. He thought about Cross, who had filed a regimental after-action report that described the UNSC as unidentified Imperial allies of unusual tactical methodology, and shown a creativity with institutional language that suggested he'd been doing this sort of thing for 30 years. He thought about home. "Roland," he said, "how long?" The AI considered. Not the calculation. He'd had that ready for hours, the right way to say it. "If the drive repairs continue at current pace," Roland said, "and if the Mechanicus adepts maintain their current level of cooperation, and if Inquisitor Caitha continues to find the investigation sufficiently absorbing to keep the throne of endurance pointed at something other than us, a pause. 8 months, maybe 7 if Dross 17 keeps sharing what he knows about exotic matter stabilization. 8 months in a universe that wanted to kill them. 8 months under the provisional protection of an inquisitor who had made a choice her institution would never have sanctioned, and was protecting that choice with 63 years of accumulated authority and the particular stubbornness of someone who had decided, late in a long career, that conscience was worth the administrative difficulty. 8 months, and then home. Lasky nodded slowly. Behind him, the bridge crew moved at their stations with the quiet efficiency of people who had survived something they didn't fully understand and had decided, collectively, that understanding could wait and surviving could not. "Then we'd better get to work," he said. In the end, the UNSC did not conquer the Imperium of Man, nor did the Imperium consume them. What happened was stranger and more durable than either outcome. 2 humanities, forged in entirely different furnaces, found in each other a mirror they hadn't known they needed. The Imperium saw what humanity could have been without 10,000 years of grinding faith and institutional terror. The UNSC saw what humanity became when survival was the only value left, when ingenuity was sacrificed for obedience and hope was traded for endurance. Neither liked everything they saw, but both, in the space of 43 days, learned to look. Inquisitor Keith's investigation would continue for 11 months. Long enough for the Infinity to go home. Long enough for the technical exchange to leave permanent marks on both civilizations. Long enough for Dross 17 to write a theological treatise that the Mechanicus would alternately revere and suppress for the next 2 centuries. Cross would be promoted and would spend the rest of his career quietly breaking the rules he'd learned to break in Vantris Secundus, in saving lives with the kind of pragmatic flexibility that the Imperial Guard officially discouraged and unofficially depended on. Roland's last transmission to Dross 17, sent as the Infinity made its final jump, was 3 words: keep asking questions. Whether the Magos followed that instruction and what answers he found is a story the 41st millennium has not finished telling. The Emperor protects. More stories await.